Now I got to find out where the chat is. Oh, there's the chat. Okay.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our live stream tonight for the speaker series. My name's Lyle Wetch. I am the Director of Information Technology here at CAPA, as well as a member of the CAPA Education Committee. Normally, Dan, our Director of Education, would be here to do the welcome, but he's decided that it was more important to go off and be taking pictures on a vacation. And I've seen a couple of the shots he's taken, so I'm sure Dan is enjoying a wonderful time and everything's on its way and going. We have an excellent presentation today, and we'll introduce Chad in just a moment. We do have a couple of housekeeping things that I just want to cover beforehand, and I will be typing some of this into the comment section as a bit of reminder. It's great to see so many people from coast to coast. Some of you on the East Coast. It's a little bit late, and but welcome, and we're glad to see you coming in. We're pushing close to about 220 people at the moment that are here live, so that's awesome. We really appreciate you coming in and joining us for this this special session. Now, while the session is live, if you have any questions, if you could type them into the chat and just make sure that you put the letter Q in front of the question, because if you've got other comments about how great the presentation is or different things that are going on, I want to make sure that we don't miss any of your questions for our presenter. So just put a Q in front of it and then type the question in, and that way I flag them so that we get to the point where we are going to take Q&As. We can bring your questions up during the presentation and make sure that we get everybody's questions answered. So just a brief introduction about Chad. Chad Tobin is a fine art photographer living and working in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. He's one of the founding members of the Hot Fog Collective, a group of East Coast artists specializing in project-based photography and documentary work. He's been inspired by Sofia Coppola's critically acclaimed movie Lost in Translation, and so he spent a humid summer in Japan. Are there any other type of summers in Japan? It always seems to be relatively humid there. Anyway, in Tokyo. And he explored the expanding metropolis with whimsical fascination, making fast friends of complete strangers in crowded streets, open parks, dark alleys. There's probably a story there. And taboo nightclubs. There's definitely a story there. So anyway, the resulting photographs celebrating the beauty and fleeting connections in moments of chaos and unnerving stillness, intentional release. And so his photo zine, Tokyo Ice Cream, was released in 2021 by Tour Dogs Publications. And he's got an excellent presentation for us tonight on Did You Just Take My Photo? But just before we jump into the information from Chad, we're going to be joined by our Director of Membership, and Kayla's going to have a couple of comments and words for you with this special live stream that we've got. Welcome, Kayla. It's all yours.
Thanks, Lyle. So I've been a member of CAPA for many years, and I've met a lot of you who are CAPA members. But to me, CAPA's never been more exciting than it is right now. We're growing, we're offering more opportunities than ever to learn, to compete, and to be inspired. Our mission is strong: to foster an inclusive community that champions ethical practices and supports photographers at every skill level. We're here to help you tell meaningful visual stories through creativity, education, and connection. To those of you who are not CAPA members yet, if you join, you'll be joining a vibrant community and enjoy outstanding benefits. And those of you who are members already know that, but let me just give you a few of those benefits. We have expert-led education that's been growing and growing over the last couple of years, from workshops and lectures to speaker series like tonight, image critique nights, image editing nights, and judging courses. We have exclusive competitions, 8 members-only contests where you can showcase your talent and get inspired by recent winners on our website. All of these are included in your membership at no extra cost. And we have the beautiful full-color Canadian Photography magazine, which is delivered to your door 4 times a year in print, but also you have online access to current and past issues. And today we've got a special offer just for you who have not yet joined CAPA. We have an exclusive 20% discount on new 1-year individual and family memberships. Use the code SPEAKER25. That's SPEAKER25 at checkout. But don't wait, because this offer expires at the end of the day at midnight, Saturday, September 20th. So sign up now or as soon as this session's over and be part of CAPA's growing community of photographers across Canada.
All right. Excellent, Kayla. Thank you. And just for those of you that may have been rapidly scrambling for a pen, I have put that code into the chat, and it is only valid until Saturday, as Kayla mentioned. So thanks, Kayla. What we'll do now is we'll hand things over to Chad and open up your presentation. And so you're good to go. And I'll be monitoring the chat, answering any questions you've got, and taking care of any questions when we get to the question time. All right, Chad, thanks very much. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for the invite and the chance to talk to so many photographers. And this is just a wonderful setup, and I look forward to just kind of like talking about street photography. So, a quote that's really super important to me about photography is like, why photography? And Sergio Lorraine has this wonderful quote. I'm just going to read it. Visible reality is the foundation of the photographic process, and the game is to organize the rectangle. With a rectangle in my hand, a camera, I look for geometry and emotion. So honestly, with street photography, that's kind of what it's about. You're merging geometry with emotion. So a lot of people kind of talk about capturing the human condition and going out with an unpredictability of what's going to happen. Street photographers often kind of say and hope, maybe if I go with my camera with curiosity, the street will catch fire. And that's really kind of what it's about. So, just a little bit about who I am. This is a picture of me in a Tokyo underground bar where there's kind of a bit of a guest list where you have to be, if you're an outsider, you have to be brought to the bar. So this is kind of my style of working is to kind of attach myself to different people and subcultures and things like that. But by day, I'm a school counselor, so that's what I kind of do as my day job, and then any other free time that I have, I'm doing photography. So street photography is something that really changed my life because I was a commercial photographer for a number of years, along with being a school counselor. And I really got burnt out on it, and I wasn't very happy. And I just noticed I wasn't taking pictures. And I think it was a March break, and I was off, and I had opened my camera bag, and there was Christmas cards inside my bag. And I thought to myself, wow, I haven't taken a photo since Christmas, or I haven't used my camera bag. And the next day, I decided not to take any more clients. I sold all my SLR gear at the time, digital SLR gear. I looked like I was in a SWAT team, and bought a rangefinder camera with a 35 millimeter lens and immersed myself in street photography. So it's something that I really care about. So street photography really became my passion, and I decided to kind of really find a place where I could practice street photography. I was really kind of obsessed with reading books, learning everything I can. YouTube is a wonderful resource that you can really use to kind of like dive into it, but you kind of really have to do it to understand it and to put it into practice. Even though I don't practice street photography as much now, I'm still learning about it, and there's still things that really kind of focus on getting better and always improving. So the body of work that I'm going to show you now is work that I did do in Japan. It was published in a zine by a place called Tour Dogs. They're wonderful. They're based both in Brooklyn and California, and they produce a number of different photographers' work. And I was just very lucky for them to be interested in the work. So I spent one summer, 2 months in Tokyo, and I decided to really just spend all my time photographing within the city. So I kind of didn't go out. I didn't do any kind of tourist things. What I decided to do was just to go to different pockets of areas. So I might take the subway to Shinjuku, the famous area, and then I would just stay there until the early morning hours. And then the next day I might go to Ginza, like the famous shopping district, and I would just stay there. And sometimes I would come home to my Airbnb, sleep in the afternoon, kind of recharge because it was really hot and humid. But I took 8,000 photos over the course of 8 weeks, and pretty much about 20, I think 20 photos made it into the zine. So street photography is really one of those things that can be difficult because you have to really work it in order to get something that's kind of viable. It's not an easy type of photography, but I'll just show you some of the work, and we can talk about it a little bit. So this was just kind of being in Tokyo and just kind of trying to feel the energy. And usually in street photography, it's really kind of something considered not to take pictures of people eating. It's actually considered an intimate kind of almost invasion. So when you're photographing in street photography, kind of the rule is we're not allowed to take pictures. If somebody's in a restaurant and they're eating, it's really kind of frowned upon. It's considered something that kind of people you can do it, but it's kind of one of the things you really shouldn't. Now, an ice cream on the street, I was walking towards this woman, and she just looked very interesting. I loved her hair. I loved the ice cream and the gesture and the watch, and it was just very humid, and the ice cream's kind of melting. And I had the camera kind of pre-focused, and I took the picture. I use flash for the majority of my photography, and I use direct flash. And direct flash is something that, if you kind of look up photography and you look up flash, people really kind of say to stay away from flash, because direct flash, sorry. And one of the reasons is it creates almost like a harshness and an unflattering light. I use flash for the reason of I like to kind of usher people into the areas of the frame that I want. And I'm also extremely attracted to film noir. So I kind of like that tension of dark and shadows and things like that. This is an example of a picture without using flash. So when I was photographing in the daytime, I wouldn't necessarily use flash. But this was at an outdoor festival. It was like the first day that I was there, and I just kind of went walking around. And I work very close when I do street photography. So working very close is one of the things that, in street photography, it's kind of hard to do, and you have to kind of build up your courage. But I'm always interested in kind of like a scene that I kind of stumble upon. And for this, I thought, I wonder how many different heads that I can put in one picture. So I think there might be like 13 or 14 different kind of heads, and trying to arrange chaos. That's one of the things that I love about street photography, is trying to wrangle a composition where you're organizing the frame and you're kind of working towards that. So it's just kind of, and I took, like, the camera that I use is a very quiet camera. And I remember taking a series of images and kind of waiting for one of the two people, to kind of turn back and look at me. And it actually took quite a while, because the camera that I use, it doesn't make a loud shutter noise, but it's just about kind of like being curious about the city. This is a group of people called salarymen in Japan, workers that often work 16 to 18-hour days. And I would kind of attach myself to pockets of people. And in Japan, it's a wonderful place to do street photography, because people are so polite, and you can get away with a lot. And what I would do is, if there was a group of people, I would either buy beers, or I would buy a bottle of water, and I would just kind of be approachable, and I would kind of just hang out, and then I would just go with them wherever they went. And often they were extremely polite and accommodating. And the idea with street photography sometimes is to take pictures of people in public before they know that you're taking pictures, and then also you can make street photography with them, conscious. Like, you can see the gentleman in the middle of the frame kind of looking at me. I was really attracted to the scene, because they kind of remind me of like the Four Beatles, like almost like the guy in the middle has more of a kind of a Paul McCartney haircut, and just a lot of, they're always dressed the same, and they got their briefcases. And this was a park kind of in the center of where I was staying. So I would go at lunchtime, and sometimes I would sit and have lunch. And these gentlemen didn't speak a word of English, but they kind of got used to me, and I would just photograph them they would come to the same park at the same time. So I would just kind of come with them, and then eventually they kind of stopped looking at me, or they would be very friendly, but they would just go on and talk about their business and work. Sometimes I would look for quiet moments like this, just kind of surreal moments. I'm really into complicated framing. I really like multiple things in the frame, but sometimes if you make a body of work, it can be a lot to process, in the sense that your eyes almost get tired when everything's in focus. So I'm shooting the majority of my pictures at f8 and f11. So I'm not using shallow depths of field when it comes to street photography, because I want to kind of tell more of a story. And for a scene like this, I was really attracted to kind of the gesture of the security guard, and almost like the musicality of his pants, like his legs, and that lean. So in Japan, there's a lot of security, and there's lots of people, like in department stores and areas where it's people's jobs just to stand there for quite long periods of time. So you would see almost like this repeating Renaissance kind of gestures of people just kind of like leaning, because they have to stand on concrete. So I became really interested in kind of like the inner workings of how that looked. Sometimes I would work extremely close. This was at an outdoor festival, and I would just I was just in love with just the idea of people kind of out and about and fashion and just being new to Tokyo. Just loved seeing the details of how people express themselves and what type of fashion accessories that might be different from, say, North America. And I would just Japan is a wonderful place to kind of really experiment with that. This is reflections is something in street photography. It's something that it's really fun to play with. So kind of shooting into a window. This is in Ginza, really one of the most expensive shopping district in Tokyo. It's pretty expensive in terms of what the shops are, and it's kind of like Fifth Avenue for New York. But I was just kind of like really into the way the kind of like organizing the frame, so trying to tell as many stories and using the person, the mannequin in the store window as the anchor and as the main focal point, and then just kind of waiting for the other things to kind of line up and just trying to bring lots of different information into the frame. Organizing these types of things can really sometimes be difficult in the sense that you have to take a lot of pictures for kind of things to line up, but that's street photography, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. I also had a I also had a real affection for shooting sleeping taxi drivers. So part of me would love to go back and do a whole series of shooting taxi drivers in Tokyo, because the cars were impeccable. Like it was an interesting thing. It was really hot, so they'd be sleeping and working around the clock. They'd have the air conditioning going constantly, and I just love the idea of just seeing what that nightlife, that almost like that film noir type thing, and then just trying to get working closer and closer and closer to people. This is making work on a subway can be really difficult, but this is an example of my camera being out of focus and kind of using out of focus as a technique. So I was on the train, and I was going somewhere on the subway, and I was going somewhere. I forget where I was going, but I just remember seeing this woman who was kind of lost and kind of thought directly across from me, and I thought, what could I do to make an interesting picture, because the subway is really busy and there's lots of different things going on. And what I did is I took my lens and I just kind of slightly put it out of focus. And what that did is it kind of helps with like kind of a dreamy aspect. Like in street photography, an unfocused picture can be a really wonderful aesthetic to use. You can really guide somebody in how they're thinking by using out of focus imagery. I'm very obsessed with sharp images. So like for me, I use a Leica rangefinder, so I'm really into high contrast and very sharp images. But it's really nice, and it really changes the flow of things when you include pictures that are out of focus, and they just kind of have more of a dreamy kind of quality to them. Sometimes I would wake up in the morning and I would just try to shoot people kind of going to work, or people lost in thought, or look for patterns. So I was really interested in the gentleman on the billboard, almost like he's peering from around the corner and looking in the same direction as the girl. So this is early in the morning, just coming up from the subway and trying to organize the chaos of where we were and the busyness of the city, and feeling that energy and allowing the pictures to kind of have some of that. Again, this is at a street kind of market where there's lots of different people, and I really like to layer pictures. So I really like to have foreground, middle ground, background. So the idea of having really clean backgrounds allows your subjects to kind of jump out. So when you layer things by putting something in the foreground, the middle ground, and background in street photography, it's a very common technique, and it can really just be about small gestures. So for me, what really caught my eye was the textured wall, but the tilt of the girl on the right, just her leg tilting up, and that caught my eye, and I quickly pressed the shutter. So sometimes it's really about just kind of looking for something that can anchor within the frame. This is again just kind of almost like an establishing shot, like a nighttime, just kind of what it was like being in the busy neighborhood. And I think in the zine, this is an early shot just to kind of establish where you are. It's almost like when you're doing a photo essay, it's one of those things that kind of gives you a kind of a place marker for how things are going in traffic. And again, it's almost like trying to create a cinematic atmosphere where, if credits are rolling in a movie, that's a way to think about if you're traveling somewhere and you really want to kind of start the photo essay. A lot of National Geographic photographers will do that. There's an establishing shot that really shows kind of the area. Um, Street photography is really about failure. So it's about taking so many photographs in order for maybe one photograph to work. So as I was walking, I always had my camera out, but I noticed kind of her top almost had the lines, and it kind of mimicked, I saw the lines on the street, and I thought to myself, oh, I wonder if I shoot the picture, will those two threads kind of like work together? The other thing, what the flash does is it almost reflects the light, so you can see the iPhone and the twirly cable for her headphones. But then you also all of a sudden you see the earrings that mimic the street sign in the background. You're really trying to use patterns and shapes that really cause kind of somebody to feel the busyness. Like, you can tell she's kind of rushing. I love the gesture of her hand and just kind of like the way her lips are put together. So it's street photography is really about trying to capitalize on a moment where things just kind of happen and you're trying to capture it. But the majority of the time it doesn't work. So if you said to somebody, okay, you have to take 8,000 pictures for 19 or 20 of them to work. Sometimes that can be really disheartening to people, where they say, well, that's, that the return rate. Street photography is really about 99.9% of it not working. And then every once in a while, the world kind of coming together, and the serendipitous photo gods kind of giving you a bit of a break. This is probably my favorite picture that I took in Japan. This was a gentleman trying to kind of. I was walking. It was raining. I was walking, and this gentleman on the right was kind of trying to get these two girls to kind of come to a club, and the club was the brochure that she's kind of holding over her eyes, and she was kind of laughing, and her friend kind of wasn't into it. And I walked by the scene, and I thought, oh, that's kind of an interesting thing. And then I circled back, and then I got low, almost underneath, and then pre-focused my lens, and then shot the picture. So the picture was made really quickly, but if you use the same focal length, so I used a 35 for this trip, what happens is you start to actually know with how far you are and how much of the frame will be included. So after you keep using the same lens over and over and over and over again, street photography gets a little bit easier of understanding how much of the things will be in the frame. So again, for me, it's really about kind of her eyes shifting, and I can kind of hear, I mean, I took the picture, so I have this emotional attachment to it, but at the same time, I can just hear her kind of laughing behind that brochure, and I just love the details of the umbrella, and it almost being like this canopy and the light kind of shooting underneath. And I do a lot of framing where I cut kind of parts of people's heads off and things like that, as using just kind of different visual geometry stuff. I had a dream. I really went to Japan because of A Lost in Translation, the Bill Murray movie, and I had this kind of on my bucket list that I was going to sing karaoke, and sure enough, these it happened, like just kind of similar to what the movie. It kind of happened, and this is a picture kind of made in the karaoke bar with the people that had taken me to sing karaoke, similar to what happens with Bill Murray. But again, it's almost like a kind of a creepy picture, like you don't really know the narrative. I do. But sometimes with street photography, it's really good to create pictures that almost create more either tension or kind of like you're not sure what's happening, like is something sinister going on. So because of like the film noir approach, the idea of something sinister being really presented is kind of sometimes what street photographers do for their narrative. So like, is danger imminent, that type of thing, and using texture to create tension, things like that. So many people walking, and I became really infatuated with people and shooting through umbrellas, and like, how people felt, they, wondering if this person is sad or do they just look sad. And part of me wished I had lived in Japan, just do a whole series on shooting through umbrellas. This is actually an aquarium that's on a sidewalk in the Sony building in Tokyo. And what I would do is I would walk by there a lot of the time, and I would just kind of shoot through the aquarium on the sidewalk and look for a clean background. And in street photography, gesture is like one of the most important things, because gesture kind of conveys, almost like Renaissance painting, where the gesture will allow for a certain direction and feeling and emotion and lines in photographs. So it's one of those things that you kind of pay attention to when you're trying to make a more of an interesting frame. This is in the famous fish market. I don't think they have it anymore, or it's quite different. I got arrested twice at this fish market, because you're not allowed to, foreigners and outsiders are not allowed to be there during when they're auctioning, like, $20,000 tunas. But I had created a little piece of paper in my camera bag that that I used Google Translator to say, hey, I'm a photographer and I'm my first time in Japan and I'm really interested in things, and it's just this, but it's in Japanese. And then I showed it to the police, and they were lovely. They escorted me out, and they said, yep, no problem, it's all good. But they did detain me at first, because they thought there was something, I was there like taking pictures from some sort of competition, or some looking for information. But once they read the thing, they were like, oh, he's harmless. So then they took me out, but then I snuck back in. I'm very bold with a camera. Outside of not having a camera, especially in my job, I'm very passive. I'm very easygoing. With a camera, I'm a little bit different. I'm more of a risk taker when it comes to street photography. But at the same time, in the second time, I just claimed I got lost. But this time, I think they were kind of onto me, because they drove me farther outside of the market. They knew. This is again where they're cutting tuna, and this is inside. And again, with street photography, if you kind of act like you belong there, the people around you they'll kind of be okay with it. Not everybody. There's lots of confrontation and things that happen. This is a poets bar, an underground poets bar, where this was the bartender, and she was almost like this gesture, like she was the host, and she was kind of wrangling the chaos, and very performative. And so I was brought there by some other photographers that I met, and I asked, can I make pictures? And they said, if you don't make pictures, you're not allowed to be here. So they believe that art has to be constantly made, and in Japan that's a wonderful kind of vibe. This is the owner right here. This is the owner of the bar. And again, this is an out of focus picture, but he was very drunk, and the chaos of just sitting next to him, and the closer sometimes you make photographs with a wide angle lens, the more aspects you can make somebody feel like they're there. This is a group of people who kind of dress up and live like it's the 50s. So on Sunday, they go to a place called Yoyogi Park. There's a famous movie by Wim Wenders called Tokyo Ga. And it's generations now of people who dance to Elvis and 50s and 60s music. And again, it's just about buying a round of beers and sitting down. And the more you sit there and the longer you sit there, the more invisible you become. So I had a wonderful opportunity to kind of work with a National Geographic photographer, and he told me that the longer you're willing to be patient, the more invisible that you become, and the more people will just kind of not realize that the camera's there. So I just got really into kind of trying to make work wherever I would go, and trying to make interesting images. And again, as it got to be dark, I spent pretty much 3 or 4 hours with them. Again, they didn't speak any English, but if you buy beers, it's really an interesting. People let their guard down fast. But at the same time, too, like the camera, sometimes people will kind of ham it up for the camera, and you can make portraits and different things like that. And just this is an example of using flash at night that I really like. It just kind of creates that film noir look. And then just doing a portrait, right? So I'm using a 35 millimeter lens, but I'm shooting it as a portrait. But I also like to include other aspects and things in the frame. So it's about about including the girl, even though she's not faced, she's faced the other way. It gives kind of a relational thing that happens kind of geometry wise, and the reflection of his hair. So this right here is hanging out, much to the chagrin of my mother. She knows that sometimes with a camera I get into situations that aren't the best. So this is actually hanging out with the Yakuza, so the Japanese mafia. So in Japan, it's very easy to kind of wander into different situations in different parts. And the gentleman that I was with was a paramedic, so we were quite lucky because the paramedic kind of offered help, and then we helped her, and it went over well. And then they were like, they're buying drinks, you know what I mean? Like it's one of those things that you really kind of just, you're lucky to be there. But again, it's kind of storytelling. You don't really necessarily know. But the world is kind of sometimes a dark place, and you make photographs that have tension, and street photography is one of those things. While I was there, I kind of crashed a royal wedding. Again, I can be pretty brazen with a camera, in a sense that there was I saw 8 photographers going into this hall, and I just followed because I said, oh, there's got to be something interesting. And then I just started photographing. And then I was there for maybe 2-3 hours, taking wedding photos along with the 8 other photographers. And then eventually I had a plate of food, and then I left, and people were very, very lovely to me. But this was in this kind of grand ballroom, and there was media there, and yeah. So it was just kind of trying to kind of like, as an outsider, I was just trying to kind of understand what Japan was like, and looking through it at kind of a different lens. And again, trying to capture the image of like the energy of the city, that type of thing, and making pictures of people kind of rushing to work or home from work, and using the background as a way to kind of give a feeling, right? So like adjusting so that there's a bit of a tilt so that you feel the energy, and then hopefully getting lucky with the manual focus and making sure her eyes in focus. Most of the time it doesn't work. Sometimes you get lucky and it works. This is in that underground bar, poet artist bar, and this girl just kind of sat down across from me. And again, I love using like bottles and foreground and elements so that you feel like you're sitting there, and then trying to organize her within the frame. So I'm purposely framing her so like she's the subject, but I'm using the picture in the background. You can't see what's on the picture, but almost implying. And I love reflections, her little makeup mirror and her eye moving towards the center. And then the only eye connection that's kind of true to the lens is the person on the wall, kind of, and having those different pieces interaction. So like this is the type of work that I like to make. So that was just kind of a sample of kind of what was. So when it comes to street photography, you really have to kind of be passionate about it, and you have to kind of almost think of it in the way of, what could you do if, like, you have to find a way to kind of, if you were going to read 100 books about a subject without getting bored. That's what street photography was for me. So I really kind of, all of a sudden, I just became obsessed with it, and that's all I wanted to do. So there's this thing that a friend of mine, Bob Carney, he's a wonderful printer, and he has a gallery in Toronto. He has this trick. It's kind of called the Bob trick. He said, what would you do if you won, say, the Lotto Max, and you could do anything? And he asked me that question. I said, well, I would probably take workshops. I would make photographs. I would travel. I would just keep learning. And he said, isn't that what you're doing now? And I said, yeah. He said, so the key to life is to do those things, just do it on a smaller scale. So you can't do it, if you had millions of dollars, it'd be easier to do those things. Like, I still have to work. But that doesn't mean that you can't, you cannot do all the things that you want to do. You just have to do them on a smaller scale. So I love the quote, Hunter S. Thompson, anything that gets your blood racing is probably worth doing. Street photography is often that kind of exciting way to kind of think about it. So another thing too is you really have to kind of give up your free time. If you're going to pursue street photography, it often takes a lot of tries and a lot of failures. The other thing too that's really super important is that it's something that the passion for it, it doesn't necessarily come right away. It's almost like through a series of small discoveries. So for me, just taking a picture in public without somebody kind of, asking permission, that was a huge first step. And I really had to kind of do it over and over again. And then it kind of led to understanding, okay, I want to do this more, right? So you have to you have to really care about it, I think, to advance, but that's any type of photography. So just this applies to street photography as well as any types of photography, but I'm sure lots of people, if I asked everybody, who this guy is, you would know it's Bradley Cooper, right? So I have a theory. It's called the Bradley Cooper effect. And so whenever I teach photography, I teach the Bradley Cooper effect. So in 1999, Bradley Cooper was a on the Actor Studio. So he wasn't on it. He was in the room when Sean Penn was talking about being in plays and movies, and he asks a question of Sean Penn, and it's interesting to look back because in 1999 nobody knew who Bradley Cooper was, and there's Bradley Cooper in the front row, and there's Sean Penn. So if you notice Bradley Cooper, he's practically in Sean Penn's lap. So he's actually sitting in the same set of seats that the other two people next to him are, but he's literally out of his chair. So with photography and street photography or any type of photography, you have to find the photography that kind of makes you, you know. So in 1999, nobody knew who he was, but you could tell that he was so driven that he loved acting, and that's, he wanted to do what they were doing. And with photography, it's so true. And then here's the next year, him asking Robert De Niro a question. So this is in his second year of studying acting, and then and lots of people were intimidated to ask Robert De Niro because of the stature of Robert De Niro. And then the next year, there's Steven Spielberg, and where's Bradley Cooper? Bradley Cooper's right in the front right, and you can see he's intensely staring, and he's a part of that. And photography is really, like, getting better at photography is really about that. So it's kind of about, being attracted to what you want to do, and then learning as much as you can, and then practicing it. So I think the Bradley Cooper effect is if you're interested in street photography, you almost have to kind of like try it out and see if that you like it. And if not, that's okay. It's a genre that lots of people say, I wish I could do it. And it's very intimidating, but you do have to kind of like work at it, right? So there is no kind of eureka moment. You really have to just kind of get lost in it and try to kind of really get better. So you have to really put in almost like that 10,000 hours of just saying, okay, there's something about this, or you know what, I think this is really good, or why is this not good? You have to always be curious. I love the idea of street photography because it's a great way to kind of like escape everything else. Like, what makes you forget? It's almost like Vegas time. Like in a casino, there's no windows because they want you to kind of forget about the clock. So with street photography, being out with your camera can often feel that way. I'm sure if you're photographing landscapes or scenic things like that, you get the same feeling. But really, you have to kind of like lose yourself. And you got to be patient. YouTube is wonderful, and you really have to kind of challenge yourself and try to get better. And you have to think about, what type of photos do I want to make? Do I want to make pictures of people on the street, or am I okay with the fact that somebody might confront me about why I'm taking pictures? Those are all parts of street photography. So the other thing too is developing a palette. So like any type of photography, it's kind of like scotch. Like the first time I had scotch, I hated it, and then it was through a series of somebody who knew what they were doing with scotch kind of introduced me to, a better scotch, and then a better scotch, and you kind of learn just the different elements of it, right? Think of it as McDonald's too. Like, having a fine dining experience and McDonald's are two different things. How do you know good photography if you're not looking at kind of the best, right? So looking at Magnum Photographers, the Magnum Photo Agency, which is kind of considered the best in terms of photography in the world. So it's like looking at stuff that really people have done really well, right? So yeah. And what gets in the way? Sometimes photography, we like to think that we're good. We like to have people who tell us lots of different things. You're thinking we got the shot, and then moving on. So how to make great photographs? Photography is tough. Good photography is tougher. Great photography is hard, and amazing photography is near impossible. So before we kind of get into the rules, maybe we could do some questions, and then we can get into kind of. I'll give you some kind of guidelines about how to kind of approach making street photography. So yeah.
All right. Excellent job so far. Lots of good questions. So, just as a reminder to everybody that if you do have questions, just make sure that you type them into the chat and put a Q there. So, let's just take a look at some of the ones that we've got. Darlene asks, what camera / lens combo is your favorite? I love shooting with my Fuji X100F with a 23mm lens.
Right. So the Fuji 23 mil is the equivalent of a 35. So all of the Japan work that I showed you tonight is a 35. I now use a 28, but there's no way that I could have made street photography the first 10 years with a 28, because with a 28 mil, you have to get extremely close. A 35 is probably, I would say, the best thing to start with, because it kind of forces you to kind of put yourself in the scene. Plus, it allows you to give a lot more context, and it's wide enough to also to be able to use an aperture like f8 that gives you more kind of context. As a wedding photographer and as a commercial photographer, I had all the 1.4 lenses, and I looked like I was in a SWAT team. I wish I had just had a 35 and an 85 when I was shooting weddings, because I would have taken much better pictures. So the 35 is definitely, that's one of the best ones, all around ones to use, and using your feet as the zoom. In street photography, I like to only use prime lenses, so I'm not using zoom lenses. I like using prime because your body becomes this physical camera at the same time because you're moving. Yeah.
All right, excellent. So we've got a question here from Robert from Stouffville, Ontario. Are the street photos, are your street photos always in black and white?
That's a great question. I'm really interested in black and white photography. If I shoot anything color, I shoot film. So I shoot Portrait 400 in film. I find I struggle myself with color processing. And I think it's because there was a time period of 2 years where I shot nothing but film, and for some reason I'm just hooked on color film. But color film is so expensive now that with street photography you have to do such a high rate of failure that it can be extremely expensive. Now, saying that, the Ricoh GR4, which has a 28 mil lens that just came out recently, has the best color, digital color I've seen, and it's a wonderful street camera. It is the best digital color I've seen. So I struggle with that. So for me, black and white, I just kind of, and I'm really attracted to film noir. That's really where I'm at there.
Galib Hussein Photography and Film said, love this shot. Not sure which one that's from, so maybe we could get another pop in to let us know. Tor actually asked a question, said, is it film? I'm not quite sure what that was referring to as well.
Yeah, all those files are digital Leica files, but I'm actually using something called a Visco film preset because I really love film, and I don't like my images to be kind of too clean. I like them to have like a little bit of grain and grit, and I think that has a lot to do with kind of like I'm attracted to film photography. But digital, I love digital, being able to change ISO and being able to obviously take lots of different pictures. So I really try to aspire to make my photos, if I'm doing street, kind of look very film-esque, but at the same time too, as if I'm doing kind of fine art stuff, I kind of like the more clinical digital look. But if I'm doing street, I like it to be a little grittier and grainier. So I'm always trying to like, if they could, and I think it'll come. I think the technology is moving towards it, where it'll look more film. But color film, I've yet to see it, and I've scoured the internet to and from, and I've had conversations with people who make these things, and we're not there yet. So maybe I just don't. It's kind of like the feeling of love versus talking to a real person. AI chat. Like film is just it's alchemy. It's magic. So, but. Yeah.
Awesome. Sheldon asks, what's the law in Canada with taking street shots of people and kids?
Fantastic question. Okay, so if you're in a public space, now this is not true in Quebec. In Quebec, you have to have a person's permission if you take a picture, even in the street. You have to, they can, if you were to take that picture and publish it somewhere, even in an art form, they could come at you from a legal standpoint. The laws are different in Quebec. The rest of Canada, if somebody is in a public space, they're in a street, they're not eating in a restaurant, they're not in a bathroom, you're allowed to take their picture in a public forum. So if you're driving on the street and somebody is mowing their lawn, you could take a picture of them because you're on the street. And they have no, it's called level of expectation of privacy. So if you're in a bathroom or your bedroom or you're eating in your dining room, the idea is that the level of expectation of privacy. Now you can't go on people's property, that type of thing. And you're not going to want to do that because that's not a good thing to do. And the pictures that they just wouldn't be that. But in public, in street, especially like if there's a parade or something, people's level of expectation of privacy, you don't have any. You're being filmed, your picture's being taken all the time. The thing with kids, I do not photograph kids unless I'm in a different country. So in North America, like I would never take a picture of a teenager or a kid because in North America, it's really hyper focused on, what are you doing with that image? There's a sinister approach. If you're in Turkey, if you're in Japan, people have different ideas about people taking pictures of small children. I don't recommend it. If you ask permission and you explain what you're doing, 100%. But I started a project where I was photographing at carnivals. That's kind of where I started with photography. But there were so many kids around, and it became such an issue. People were like, "What are you doing?" And people thought I was a creep, and I don't want that. That's not who I am. That's not who I am. So and not only that, it's one of those things that you just have to be so careful. Like so with that, but an adult in public, if you're doing street photography, is as long as they're in a public space and you're in a public space, people don't have. If it's in a building, the owner of the building, so not necessarily the manager, but the owner of the property can come and say you cannot take pictures in here. But also sometimes they have signs posted. So if they have signs posted, then you're not allowed. But if there's no signs posted and you take a picture, say, for example, in maybe the mall or something, the person in the mall could come up to you and say, the person who owns the property has to say, no, you're not allowed to take pictures. But at the same time, you pictures of people in the mall, that would be creepy in a sense. Like it's really kind of, street photography is really tough, but a great place to do it is public events like parades, food festivals, things like that, where people kind of expect that they're going to be in photographs. That's a great place to start. That's a really big question.
Awesome. We do have a response from Galipa Saints Photography Film that said it was the reflection shot with lots of boxes and lots of different stories in one frame awesome. That they liked. So just wanted to sort of make sure we got that one. A couple of others that we'll do, and then we'll get back to the presentation and we'll come up with sure. these later. Alan asked that to shoot black and white digital, do you set the camera to black and white or do you convert to black and white in post?
So I do set the camera to black and white. I do that because it puts me in more of that frame of mind. In terms of reviewing the picture on digital, to kind of the idea of light and shadow. And it basically, when you do that, it kind of trains your brain to kind of look for those contrasty scenes. And you all of a sudden you recognize, hey, the light on that's going to work really well in black and white. I am changing it in post, but I've since, so back then in when I did the Japan stuff, I was using a color camera. My digital cameras now they're called monochrome cameras, so they only shoot black and white. So there's no color at all in my camera, in my digital camera. The only color that I have is I have a film version of the rangefinder, and so I can shoot color in that, but my digital cameras now only shoot black and white. And that's something, and I think Pentax makes one and Leica make one too. Um, so yeah.
Awesome. That was one of the other questions that was there. So I do have the other questions that have been asked in the chat, and we will come back to those, but we just want to get ourselves back on track with Chad's
Sure.
presentation, and then we'll come back to the questions at another time. Thanks, everybody. Keep the questions coming.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about kind of like 13 fantastic things that if you wanted to really get into street photography and try, things to really consider. So, kind of the first rule, a small camera makes a huge difference. So, for example, if you're out with a 70-200 and you're walking on the street, it really conveys a different message. If you're with, like, say, a small Fuji camera or a Ricoh GR, or even if you have a mirrorless camera like a Canon or a Nikon, but you put a small prime on the camera, you're more likely to feel more comfortable. And the idea too is, like, you don't want to make somebody feel like you're the paparazzi. You want to make them feel like, hey, you're almost like an amateur. That's why I love Leica cameras, because they're very disarming in a sense. Same with like Fuji cameras, look that same way too, where people kind of don't really take them serious. They almost think of it as, oh, look at you with your grandfather's camera or grandmother's camera. Like, they kind of look older and they look more kind of amateurish. So it's a kind of a less threatening thing. The other thing too is, I know everybody can relate to this. If you haul around camera gear all afternoon or all into the evening, your back is not going to be your friend. Like, a big camera doesn't really support that. So with my camera and a 35 millimeter lens, I could literally go out from 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I could go till 3 in the morning and just carry that camera and walk as much as I want. I could not do that with a 24-70 and like a big camera body and a giant flash. It's not going to work. I might make an hour and a half, 2 hours if I'm lucky. But the smaller the camera for street photography, usually the better. Lens choice. So we talked about that. Great question. Like, 28 and 35 are really great for showing context. Like, you really want to be using your, like, if you have let's say you have a zoom and that's the only lens you have, try putting it at 35 and maybe just putting a little piece of tape so it doesn't move. And what that will do will kind of cause you to move around. I have this theory I call it the butterfly boxer theory, where I almost want to use my body. I think of my body as a boxer, so I'm trying to bend the composition. So I'm moving the viewfinder to try to get the best composition, but then I'm almost like a butterfly where I take the picture and I just kind of float away. So I want to be I don't want to be intrusive. I want to be able to take the picture and just keep moving. Or if somebody, is maybe suspicious of what I'm doing, I don't want to like linger too long. I want to, or I pretend like I'm looking past somebody, and that's what a lot of street photographers do. But the longer the lens, the more people are going to feel like you're surveillance. Now, the thing that I love about street photography is, by using flash, is that I'm completely honest. I've taken the picture. I would rather have the person know I take the picture, um, and then maybe have a conversation with me like, hey, can I see that, or why did you take my picture? That's something that is super important. And if you can kind of defend it, or you can say something, and I'll talk about that in a minute, like what to say, people often feel better about it, and you'll feel better about it. So here's settings. So like this is going to sound kind of a little kind of crazy, but stay with me. So if you're out at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and the light is getting really interesting, set your ISO to 1600. Now, somebody told me this years ago, and I thought, goes against any principle. Like, of course you want lower ISO, but what happens is, if you set it at 1600 and there's kind of, lots of sun left or whatever, what happens is then you can shoot at f8 or f11 or f16. Then you can also have a high shutter speed. And what happens is, more of the elements in your picture are going to be in focus, and you're able to work faster. So if you embrace almost the higher ISO, you get a little bit more grain, but don't look at grain as a bad thing, even though they kind of tell you it is, the photo industry. Embrace it as, almost think of it as like a brush stroke of photography. So I'd rather look at a photo that's shot at f16 that has all these different elements and stories than a picture of somebody takes at 1.4 with a neutral density filter. Like, yeah, I get that you do that if you want to isolate things. Like some people might say, well, why not just shoot at 2.8 and then you don't have to worry about the background? Great street photography is when you kind of incorporate everything. And if you start to get closer and closer to your subjects, then they occupy bigger parts of your frame, and all of a sudden the photos become more interesting. So you really want to kind of bend light and shadow. And when you shoot f16 and there's a darkened shadow, because you're at f16, all of a sudden the high contrast light begins to give geometry and emotion just with the composition itself. So it sounds really counterproductive, but really, try it, experiment it. Put 1600, shoot f11, and start at 250th or 1/250th or 1/500, and then that way you can freeze kind of people moving or doing something interesting. Here are the two most. So don't necessarily go up and say, okay, I'm going to buy a Leica because I'm going to take really great street photos. You're better off to buy a really good pair of shoes, a Fuji or a Ricoh GR, and start buying photo books. So photo books are the key to becoming a better photographer. So if somebody says, I went and I did a workshop here and it was amazing, I went and did a workshop there, I collect photo books. Now, have I been on many workshops? Absolutely. Have I done apprenticeships with famous photographers? Have I done that? Have I paid to do that? 100%. But I would say the biggest thing is collecting photo books of the genre that you're interested in. So by doing that, you're seeing work that's being curated and you've seen people that are doing it successfully. But also, I have to tell you, Joe, I have a friend who writes articles about photography, and he works in New York. And he tells me that Joel Marowitz, who is a very accomplished photographer, his street photography doesn't sell in galleries. His 8x10 fine art Cape Light work sells really well. So it's people are interested in street photography, but there's not a big market for it as much as people, you don't sell a lot of it. Like even the people who are extremely successful at it, it can be difficult. But photo books are where a lot of street photography lives because it's other photographers who are mostly interested. It's not mainstream photography. But and the shoes is like a good pair of shoes is worth the weight in gold. So composition layers, I think I kind of talked about that when I was showing the pictures. Really, when you start to use foreground, middle ground, and background, the images kind of start to take on a bigger depth. Like all of a sudden, it just kind of changes in a sense that's how you create dimensionality. And sometimes practicing it and just kind of putting something in the foreground and then just trying to kind of have separation. And then you want to look for gestures and emotions. And that's usually what makes photography more interesting. Here's another big one, failure. So I mentioned before, you really have to embrace taking lots of photos and them not working. A lot of people will take pictures of somebody walking on the street and say, okay, this is street photography. Technically it is, but is it good street photography? Is it something interesting? But that's where kind of we all start when we start taking street photos of people walking. Now, if you take people walking and there's lines of shadow pointing towards them and all of a sudden you're using other elements, then the image becomes more interesting. But really, most of the time, your street photos aren't going to work. So think about that. I took 8,000 photos to have 19 published. National Geographic photographers used to work for 3 to 6 months and have 8 pictures published. So it would be $25,000 in film and processing for 8 pictures to tell the story along with the writer. So the idea of it working most of the time, it's the exact opposite. Most of the time in street photography, failure is one of those things. And it takes a while to kind of get better at it, but you just have to kind of keep working and pushing through the failure. That's like kind of like the super important. Fear. So I have fear, even though I've taken thousands of street photos. There's lots of times where it takes me a little while to get in the groove. So if I was to go make street photos, I would literally go and for the first 15, 20 minutes, I'd be like, oh, I'm a little nervous. Like, and I just have to go out and I just have to take a few images, and then all of a sudden I start to calm down, my blood pressure goes down, and then I kind of get a groove. And then if I get something interesting, then I really start to get courageous. So it's like anything, the more you do something, the better it is. And you almost have to expect that somebody's going to say, like, what are you doing? Why are you taking my picture? That's going to happen. And your desire to create has to be stronger than the fear that you have. Otherwise, you won't do it, right? And is it easy to go out and photograph nature? Well, you have to be in shape, or you have to be willing to get up early for the good light. With street photography, you have to say, okay, I have to really be comfortable with making pictures of people sometimes without their permission, and be ready for that. And that's okay. But pushing through those moments, the great images are usually on the other side of pushing through that fear. So laws, we kind of talked about that, right? Knowing it's good to kind of look up where you're living, because you might have laws. Quebec really stands out, but the rest of the Canada, it really has a lot to do with just levels of expectation of privacy. The real big thing when it comes, if you have a confrontation with somebody, is just be as nice as you can. And usually what I say is, hey, I'm a photographer. I thought your hat was amazing. It's really interesting. I thought you looked like you could be in a movie. When you say those things, people kind of like, sometimes they're like, they want to be mad, but then all of a sudden they receive a compliment. Sometimes though, people are just like, you creep, you're taking my photo. And you can offer to delete it if that's up to you. That's something that usually can disarm a situation by saying, hey, I'll delete it. But you don't have to. Like, you can say, no, I'm not deleting it. It really, like, if the picture was amazing, then I could say to somebody, listen, I'm not going to. But most of the time, I might even look at it and be like, you know what, it's not great. I'll delete it, like, no problem. But that usually does help with kind of disarming the situation. But, and again, I would really start in really public spaces where people are going to expect to be in pictures, and people are in pictures all the time. And we in North America, we have this sense of like, oh, they're going to use my image for something bad, but really we're photographed so much. So ethics and conflict. So ethics is a huge one. So when you first start out, it's really easy. A lot of photographers will take pictures of homeless people. I'm telling you right now, do not do it. Like, stay away from it. Or street performers, people who play music on the street. Like, it there's nothing, not to say that's not interesting, but there's a real power dynamic with photographing somebody that's homeless. And it's like, it just doesn't serve it doesn't help the person who's homeless. Like, some people will defend that. They'll say, yes, it'll bring more awareness to the situation, but I haven't yet seen a street photography thing that has helped somebody like get off the street. Like, it's a power dynamic that it's very frowned upon. So if you look at people who get their street photography published or in galleries, none of it is of homeless people or street performers, because they're really kind of an easier group of people to photograph. So by staying away from that, immediately your pictures are going to be better. And it's always about being polite. Like, so for me, it's always about smiling, or being upfront and saying, this is what I do. I carry around business cards with my name, my website, and my phone number, which if somebody's doing something sinister, that's usually they don't want to give you and I say, hey, let's go to my website right now and I'll show you the type of things that I do. I just find you so visually interesting, but hey, I'll delete the picture, no problem. And that usually really combats that. Being sincere can really resolve a lot of that. Flash. So as you can tell by my images, most of the things I do is flash, and I use it because it really is about kind of tension and dynamics and things like that, and it can really cause color to pop, so the colors can intensify. I will warn you this though, starting out with flash is kind of not the best thing. You almost want to like just get used to making photographs quietly and then eventually maybe work to flash. Um, Having a project. So having a project is really, I think, kind of like collecting books. Having a project is one of the best things that you can do for your photography, because it gives you a structure and it gives you like the consistency to kind of go out and be like, okay, I have to do this, or I have to collect frames. Because it's easy just to wander aimlessly. But if you have a project, for example, if I had stuck with shooting people through umbrellas and like, getting different facial gestures, that would be my project. And I would just have to keep kind of like shooting that and then keeping a folder. You have to find something that really kind of makes you want to go and take pictures. Now, going to Japan financially doesn't work for me all the time. But if you look for public events, you could go out and you could say, hey, I'm going to take pictures of interesting hats, or I love interesting or offensive bumper stickers, and I'm going to photograph that. So it really has to be something that speaks to you, but also could be visually interesting, right? So in Magnum photography, it's easy to say Japan is a great place to go to take pictures. And it is, because it's exotic and it's beautiful and it's interesting and we're not used to it. But every street photographer does it. So I had to go away to Japan to make images to understand that I have a better chance of having my work published if I take pictures if I show a side of my hometown that nobody has seen. So it's really about finding something that really motivates you to take pictures. The other thing too, rule 12, community and feedback. So finding other people that shoot street photography or joining street photography groups. This one, you have to be super careful, because the majority of street photography shown on Facebook in those groups, it's complete shit. So people take a picture and they of a person walking and they say, okay, look at this, or they haven't considered all the elements of the frames and things like that. They're not looking for clean backgrounds. They're not putting. You really have to kind of find people who are better at it than you. So the idea that you find somebody, even the famous photographers, you can pitch and say, hey, I got 10 photos. Would you be open to me paying you $200 for an hour of a Zoom? And could we go through them? Like, that's also a really good thing. My website is chadtobin.com. If somebody writes me through the website and says, hey, would you take an hour and look through my portfolio? I'll do it for free. Because anybody that has the ability or has the wherewithal to kind of actively write me, that's often somebody that is starting that journey that cares. Most people won't, right? So however many people in the chat, most people won't, but there'll be one or two people who will take advantage of that. And I learned street photography by taking advantage of other people and saying, hey, yeah, would you look at that? Some people I paid, some people were gracious and just said, yeah. And I kind of like to give back because other people helped me. So, but having somebody who's better at it can really tell you, like, hey, do more of this, do less of that. Feedback is one of the best things in photography. You kind of don't want a pat on the back. You want somebody to say, okay, I really like what you did here. This, though, maybe next time think that. If somebody is giving you that type of feedback, that they actually mean they care about you and what you're doing. If somebody says amazing shot, it's two things. It's usually they don't want to interact with you anymore and they just want to say, yeah, great shot, or they just don't want to hurt your feelings, right? So you want somebody who's kind of, you don't want, of course, the key is not to be harsh on somebody, but to say, hey, this part I really like, more of this and more of that. It's feed. If you were to do sports, it'd be the exact same thing, right? But feedback is huge. These are some cameras too. If somebody writes me through the website, I can send you these rules too. These are different cameras. Like the Ricoh GR3 is wonderful. The Fuji is great. The Leica Q2 stuff, you can buy the Leica Q and the Q2. Those are amazing cameras, and there's different price points for different street photography. But you can use any other camera too. Like, just the smaller the lens, the better. Um, these are 5 books that I recommend that are just incredible if you want to look at amazing photography. So Wonderland by Jason Eskenazi. This is my favorite photo book in the world. And this is street photography kind of done in once the fall of the Berlin Wall and Soviet Union, just amazing. The Americans by Robert Frank, which is an extremely famous photography book. And another amazing book is called The Suffering of Light by Alex Webb, who's a street photographer, just unbelievable frames. Magnum Contact Sheets, which different, the Magnum agency, and The Book of Everything. So those are wonderful resources. And there's tons of other things. Look on YouTube, because YouTube has a lot of the summaries of these people. You can really get a taste and buy books in that area of what you want. So yeah, that's the presentation. So we can do some more questions there before we wrap up.
All right. Well, that's good because we've got a lot of questions that have been bankrolled
Okay,
in, and so a lot more to come.
fantastic.
Remember, if you have any questions, just type a Q in front of them. A lot of the ones that have already been done, I did pick up on those, but let's go back to some of the ones that were there. I think some of these have been addressed in the presentation. RS Personal asked, can you please discuss equipment options and recommendations? And that was covered in the presentation. So I think we hit that one. Now we've got another one here from Michael Collins that says, following Sheldon's questions, what about ownership of image taken in public in Canada without a release?
Great question. So how it works is if you're taking a photo for the purposes of creating art. So for example, you don't need a photo release if you've taken a picture in public and you're doing a run of 25 prints and 2 artist proofs. So that's treating the image as art. If any form of commercialization or calendar or anything like that, you would need a release. If you plan to print 40 million copies of the image, that's not an art, that's more of a commercial space. But if you're making art in terms of it's going to hang in a gallery wall, and the prints that you sell, which are usually in editions of 5, 10, maybe 15, 25, sometimes 50, the most you might see is 200, that's considered creating art. So photo releases are not something that is generally practiced, but depending on what you're doing, you really, if you're gonna have open editions where you're gonna sell print after print after print, it's good to have a photo release, especially if your picture gets picked up by Michaels and they print it on, they use it in their frames. That's a commercial usage. That's not an artistic. They're using it to sell frames. So if you're going to take pictures of people in public, and you're going to sell 25 prints at a certain size and maybe another 25 at another size, there's no that's art. You're creating art. But if anything other than that, if it's an open edition and you're just going to like crank out a ton, or you're going to make cards with the image on it, if you can't recognize the person, if it's a silhouette, you're all good. But if the person is recognizable, it's you're going to need to have a release to do that type of thing.
Awesome. And Alan has a question that was sort of from earlier on. It goes, what do you mean you've yet to see color film? Isn't there color film in camera stores?
Sorry, I meant that I've yet to see color film, the quality of color in digital photos that look like color film. I've yet to see. So that you can buy a lot of presets that mimic color film, and that's one of the reasons why I use mostly black and white, and I'm attracted to black and white. But that's what I meant. It's just you can buy color film, but a roll of portrait film, which I use, is $30.75 per roll for 36 exposures, and that's without shipping or processing and scanning. So it's about 50. It's close to $60 to have one roll of color film processed, including the cost of
And,
the film.
and Brian says, what were the reactions of people being photographed up close with direct flash?
In Japan, of 8,000 photos, I only had one person who kind of went, ah. Everybody else smiled and kind of did this after. In in different cities, in New York, people are in a hurry to get somewhere. I've shot direct flash, and people just don't even look through you. Um, I've shot direct flash in Toronto and almost been beaten up. I took a picture of a dog, a really cute dog, on film, and I got somebody tried to hit me, and I had to like basically move out of the way because I took a picture of their dog. So certain spaces, certain people, like you kind of never know what's going to happen. Like there's kind of a vibe of the city. A great way to do it is to join street photography groups and ask people, hey, I'm traveling to this city, what's doing street photography like? Because it's kind of different in every city, but it's really good to start. Your best bet is to start in public like parades and things, because people are going to be a lot less apprehensive about that. With flash, you have to do it like you're it's a pop of light. So here's my flash. There's where's my there it is right there. So it's very small. So it's on the camera. And sometimes I work so close that people often think that I'm taking a picture of something like behind them, or I might just say sorry. Oh my God, I love your hat, and then I might keep moving, or I might have a conversation with them. But most of the time, it's okay. People might be curious, but also too at the same time too, I probably wouldn't go to the roughest part of town at 10 o'clock and start shooting flash at night. It's probably not going to be met with the greatest thing. But if I go to an event, if I go to a wedding is a fantastic place to practice with a flash and a camera, because people are just, yeah, they're partying, and it's a great way to like learn how to use flash working really close up.
All right. So this sort of ties into some of the things you said. What is an example of your bad experience in the street?
It, yeah, well, definitely that time I almost got beat up for taking the picture of the dog. The first time somebody kind of confronts you, you feel really icky. So it's like this thing of like you feel like you've done something wrong. People's energy, you can kind of, especially if you internalize things, you have a period of time where you're like, oh, I probably shouldn't do that. Then I expressed how I felt to somebody who was a much better street photography than me, than I am, and they said, yeah, that's normal, and the fact that that happened to you, that's actually a sign that you're out making work, right? Now, I take a lot less street photos now because I'm doing more where I'm attaching myself to subgroups and where I'm returning to the same place. It's almost like street photography too. The more you go to a place with a camera, the more people that work around that area, if they see you with a camera, it's almost like you become part of you. It's a normal thing. So there's a kind of a joke in street photography. They say like street photography is about walking and peeing in the same places that dog pee. So you're kind of like, you're returning to the same places, and what happens is you become part of you're like a lamppost, right? So the more that you're seen in the same spot, like let's say the light is really good and bouncing off a set of buildings at this time of year. If you're there every day after work for an hour, just as the sun's going down, you become a part of the flow of the city. It takes a little while to kind of feel comfortable, but you have to work through that.
Alan had a question, which I think was a follow-up to the start. It said, a photographer in my town says that while it's legal in Ontario to photograph people in public, it's wise to ask people before you photograph them, or after shooting them. Good to ask them after.
Yeah. The majority of pictures that I've taken where I've asked if I can take a picture, the moment isn't very interesting. So it's one of those things of like in Japan, everybody doing this, uh, that's not my project, right? So my project is more about that. So if, as a street photographer, you have to kind of know that you're going to embrace kind of uncomfortableness. There's a guy on YouTube, really young guy. His name is Trevor Wisecup. And on YouTube, he posts pictures or he posts videos of his awkward street photography encounters and how he de-escalates the issues, because people get in New York can get vicious because they don't want to be photographed. Maybe they're in the country illegally. Maybe they are they don't want their image. They're paranoid. There's lots of different reasons people just don't want their image. So being a street photographer, it's going to happen, and people are going to, and it's a part of it. And if sometimes if you'll either say to yourself, "Wow, I'm not doing that again," or you might say to yourself, "You know what? I'm gonna keep at this," because usually that's what's on the other side is getting used to it and feeling okay with it. Do I still feel crappy when that happens? Absolutely, but I get better at being able to kind of lower the tension, by saying, "Hey, this is what I find really interesting about you. I'm sorry that I can delete the image. This is what I do. I'm published here, here, and here. This is you're extremely interesting. but I totally get it and I apologize. So when you say it and you say it like you mean it, it often has a lot of meaning. But there are times, like if you ask somebody's permission, you're more than likely taking a street portrait because they're aware of the camera and their reaction. And if somebody wants to go out and do street portraiture, is it street photography? I think it is. It's just a different type of street photography. Hopefully, yeah. There we go. Yeah. So if you want to do that, that's cool. Like it's really about experimenting and finding out what works for you.
And Darlene had a tip there that said that we should stop referring to it as shooting people as well. We photograph them, which is today's times. It's always a good comment to be. Steph had a question, said, I struggle with fast focusing single point with street photography. Any thoughts or suggestions?
So on your camera, if you can, there's something called, so all the pictures that I took that you saw in Japan, I didn't focus the camera. So my camera doesn't have autofocus. So it has manual focus on a tab. But on certain cameras, you have something called a focus distance scale. So I can set at f11, I have everything from 0.7 meters to 1.5, or actually probably 2 meters is going to be in focus. So if I work really close, I don't even have to focus the camera. So using autofocus, a lot of street photographers don't use autofocus. They use manual focus. And if you look on your camera's manual, being able to set your it's called your hyperfocal distance, and then that way you're just literally like shooting the camera based on distance. And to learn how to do that, what I did is a friend of mine taught me. He said, sit on your couch and practice in your living room by saying, I think that's that many meters. So from my shoulder to the edge of my is 0.7 meters. So I know the distance of that is, if I'm shooting, it's about a meter. So if I'm focused there, when I click the shutter, I don't have to think about focus and I can just get the moment. And on this camera, there's no mirror blackout. Like I guess there's not on mirrorless cameras anymore, but there's no kind of shutter going off. So that's a quicker way. If you're still using autofocus, I would use single point in the center and then try to focus and recompose as quickly as you can. But if you experimenting with manual focus speeds it up.
All right. Alan asks, when you use the flash, do you use direct flash mounted off the camera at an angle, or do you use a flash diffuser? If you use a diffuser, what type do you use?
So I'm looking for harsh shadows. So everything that any photography manual is going to tell you is going to say bounce the flash another direction to soften the light. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in like almost like a film noir 30s and 40s crime black and white, like Ouija, almost like I really enjoy the harshness. I really enjoy showing the world in a way that's really we don't often see. So I'm not using any diffuser. The odd time I will use a diffuser if I'm trying to throw more light, but what I will use is a cord, and then the cord attaches to the camera. And then what I do is I aim the flash sometimes underneath. So I hold my camera like this, and then I'll have the flash, and I'll sometimes do it up top, sometimes I'll do it up bottom, and that creates different directional light, which is tension. And so it's another way to kind of use flash. And it's most of the time the pictures don't work, but when it hits, it usually makes really interesting pictures.
Awesome. And we had several questions talking about books you would recommend and some suggestions, and you did cover that in the last slide. But there was one question that was a little bit specific that said, can you suggest any books for black and white photography inspiration specifically?
So there's a book, the first book, Wonderland by Jason Eskenazi. It's probably the best use of black and white. The imagery is just stunning. Wonderland, you can still purchase it. I think it's about $60. It's beautiful. Like the images in the black and white are just incredible. Anything by Magnum too. Like if you look at the Magnum website with that's another really good trick to do is go on the Magnum website and start looking through the photographers and they'll show you kind of like highlights of their portfolios and then seeing what kind of appeals to you. Like some people are really attracted to using color at in the afternoon where the light is really intense and you're using light and shadow and colors really pop. So it's almost like using flash. So it's really about finding what you really want. The Magnum contact sheets is great because it goes through um, tons of different photographers and you see strong examples of and you see the contact sheet so you see all their mistakes and then the picture that worked. So it's a great learning tool. You can buy that on Amazon. I think it's about $74. If you want probably the best street photography book in general for that's the most inspiring one, The Suffering of Light by Alex Webb is a retrospective of his whole career, and he used Kodachrome film, Kodak film, with a 35 millimeter lens on a small little Leica film camera, and the imagery is just beautiful. And you can look up these books online, so you can search these books in Google and then search video, and then there's tons of videos of people flipping through the books. That's another really great tip because sometimes you don't want to spend $100 or $75 on a book that maybe isn't really your jam. So put it in Google, search videos, and then there's flip throughs or YouTube videos that show all the images from these books, and that's a great way if you see it. And here's a good way to know if you're going to like it. Great photography is responded to by sounds. So if you look at photography and you go, oh, if it's not what you say, it's your body's reaction to the photography. So paying attention to that is like listen to the sounds that you make when you watch those videos. If you start making sounds of ah, oh, oh, that's a book you should buy. If you look and you go, that's not a book you should buy. That's $1 million tip. It's the sounds your body's initial response will drive the direction in which your photography should go. And street photography is something great to dabble in for sure. Is it everybody's bag? Definitely not. And as I got older, like I'm 50 years old now, and I'm less towards street photography, but the photography that I'm doing now with my projects, this if I didn't have street photography skills, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now in terms of allowing certain things to happen or to look for framing and things like that. Street photography is a wonderful way to make your photography better, even if you're landscape, people photography, because you're recognizing geometry and motion, fast moments, being able to kind of focus quick, stuff like that.
All right. Well, thank you very much for an amazing presentation. We had a lot of people in today and a lot of comments and questions. And so that was great to hear. Just sort of one final question that Darlene asked there says, did you ask my one about Shimbase area in Tokyo? What is your favorite area in Tokyo?
Oh, great question. So I loved a place called Nihonbashi. Nihonbashi was this kind of mostly there wasn't any tourists, and that's where my Airbnb was, and it was kind of where the old traditional department stores were. So there was a blend of old Japan mixed in with new Japan. So I loved that, and Shinjuku was always exciting because that's where a lot of the more character-based people expressing themselves. But Nihonbashi was the neighborhood, like that's where the park was. It was just easier to attach myself to people, to those, and then people would kind of adopt me and then take me to their home because I was just, they could see I was interested in who they are. That's the other thing. If people can tell that you're interested in them, even if they're upset with you, sometimes that can be a real lifeline in the sense of like, hey, that's why I like saying I love your hat, or wow, your coat reminds me of James Dean, or there's something wonderful about the way that you move, like your hair looks amazing, right? So those are things that really kind of make a big difference.
Awesome. And just a reminder, if you weren't here at the beginning, if you use the code SPEAKER25, you have until Saturday for 20% off an individual CAPA membership. So if you're watching this recorded, you probably missed it. You should have been here live. So other than that, that was a fabulous presentation. Thanks very much, Chad. We're seeing lots of very good positive comments in the feed. So thank you for sharing your insights and your.
Awesome.
All right. And thanks for joining us, everybody. Have yourselves a great weekend.